All right, end of 2022. It's been a crazy year for me personally. In the span of not only a year, but about 6 months, I've gained 26,000 subscribers on YouTube, about 4 million views across all my videos, about 66,000 followers on TikTok, and about 900,000 likes on TikTok. And that's so crazy. Wow, that is so insane. It's not even like it's like huge compared to others, but wow, wasn't expecting any of that. Thank you guys so much for watching, sharing, liking, commenting, whatever. Thanking to my Patreon supporters. Yeah, just thank all of you guys for making this year a special one to me. I don't want this to ramble on for too long, but 2022 was definitely crazy, and I got a lot of stuff in stock for 2023. A lot more lores, a lot more video ideas, so stay tuned for that. And without any more rambling, this is every lore I've done this year. I hope you guys enjoy, and Happy New Year.
Apache started as a tree in the forest that was chopped down and possessed by an evil spirit, attacking anyone who entered the forest, including a marauding captain who chopped him into 3 different pieces. Revived and seeking revenge, he came across a desperate outlaw. On the brink of defeat, his fiery spirit refuses to go down, and as a blazing Apache, he finds the enemy and begins the battle. The marauding captain was then saved by a justice-serving lizard man, who extinguished the flames, leaving him as just a charcoal Apache, which a mad scientist would find and rebuild into a woodborg Apache, who would then eventually be destroyed by a kickman. And that's the lore of how, after taking a tour bus to the underworld and then receiving a tour of the underworld, Sangan, by mistake, would end up getting on a tour bus to the Forbidden Realms, with some familiar looking monsters who have resided in the Forbidden Realm for quite some time. As soon as he gets off, Sangan shares a ride with a graceful angel. However, the delinquent driver was transporting some pot of greed, leading to not only the mistaken arrest, but the mistaken accusation of Sangan, who also shares his cell with the very familiar Witch of the Black Forest. And that's the lore of how outstanding dog Marin was a loyal companion to its owner. Based on the Japanese tale of Hachiko, the pup was lost by its owner and awaited for his return. There are 3 different outcomes to this story. One where the pup was eventually corrupted by darkness waiting for so long and eventually became the Mad Dog of Darkness. Another where a mad scientist stumbles across him and transforms him into Mecha Dog Marin. And the final seemingly canon version where Marin waits for over 1,000 years and still waits for its owner to return. Luckily, Marin was still able to be reborn by being adopted into the Skull Servant family, getting the attention it waited over a millennium for from White Prince and White Princess. However, while on a family vacation, the family was stopped and the pets unfortunately being contained in quarantine with a certain plague-spreading zombie. And that's the lore of how the old man from Solemn Judgment has many angels and maidens among him. Residing in the sanctuary in the sky, one of these maidens would find herself interested with a plethora of forbidden items. She would find herself stealing a forbidden chalice, a forbidden lance, and a forbidden dress. The old man would eventually catch on to her and give her a solemn scolding. However, this would not stop her, as she would find herself stealing a forbidden scripture. The old man would catch her in the act, however, and she would receive a solemn strike. This would turn her into the condemned maiden. She would eventually come back as the condemned witch to seek her revenge on the old man, giving him a witch's strike and turning her into the condemned Dark Lord. Presumably feeling guilty from her act of revenge, the Dark Lord attempts to sanctify herself from sin and takes it into her own hands to sanctify other Dark Lords with her forbidden chalice, whether they like it or not. And that's the lore of how Tenkabito Shien was a samurai who ruled the battlefield with his legendary ebon steed, eventually becoming a legendary samurai whose armor is said to be colored crimson from the blood of those he's faced. Eventually being promoted to shogun, Shien would attempt to unite the land amongst their civil war. However, Shien was not the hero people assumed him to be. Unbeknownst to anyone else, at night Shien would sit in his castle and continue to plot his devious scheme. Shien would fight alongside 5 other legendary samurai, those being Kizan, who would eventually become Grand Master of the 6 Samurai and lead the new generation of the 6 Samurai. Anishi, a reckless daredevil who would become Shien's chancellor and offer help with battle strategies. Kageki, who had mechanical arms to stall for support, would lose both of his real arms in battle and become chamberlain to the samurai. Mizuho, the only woman of the 6 samurai, who was also married to Shinai, the most trusted by Shien, who would always somehow be able to escape death. Sadly, Shinai would be the only one of the 6 samurai to fall in battle. His soul would possess the armor he died in, becoming Spirit of the 6 Samurai, and protecting the current generation of the 6 Samurai. Finding out about his death, Mizuho was in such distraught that she stepped down serving as samurai and joined a religious order, serving as hand of the 6 Samurai and striking down any who would threaten the shogun. One day Mizuho was approached by a man appearing to be Shien, but was actually his body double, Kagemusha of the 6 Samurai, also known as Kagemusha of the Blue Flame. He would serve to divert assassination attempts on Shien. Kagemusha knew all the secrets of Shien, including him setting up Shinai to be killed because of his paranoia. It is greatly speculated that Kagemusha was Shinai and Mizuho's son, who was taken from them and raised to be Shien's body double, and Shien had Shinai killed in battle to protect this information. They would take this information to the rest of the samurai, who would agree that Shien was overcome with power and had to be stopped. The samurai had prepared a standoff for Kagemusha and Shien, who would eventually come to a face-off. Being a double of Shien in every way, Kagemusha and the shogun were evenly matched. However, Kagemusha would be the victor in the end and assume the identity of the Shien, wearing the same necklace as his late father and leading the rest of the samurai as as Shadow of Shien. Shien's spirits would be trapped in the armor he wore, similar to the fate he gave to Shinai, becoming the secret of the Six Samurai. And that's the lore of how Gigobite started out as a young monster with a tranquil soul, but a heart that would one day be tainted by evil. Gigobite would fight alongside other monsters when one day he would come close to almost being eaten. Luckily, he was saved by Area. Fighting alongside her, Gigobite would power up into Gigabite. Gigabite would become unpossessed by Area, allowing him to go off on his own. However, Gigabite would go off and get himself into quite some trouble. Sneaking around Freed the Brave Wanderer's camp, he would try to steal some food being made by the marmoting captain. Attempting to stop him, Freed and Gigabite would begin the battle. Not wanting to kill him, or suffer any casualties of his own, Freed would send Gigabite to a different dimension. Stumbling around in the different dimension, Gigabite would come across the Invader of Darkness, who would attempt to offer him as a tribute. However, he would be saved by the captain from the camp, who followed him into the different dimension to make sure he would be okay. Escaping the Invader of Darkness, they would come across a blazing Apache, who for some reason wanted revenge on the captain. They would begin the battle, and Gigabite, on the brink of defeat from Apache, would be saved by the marauding captain, who would use his body as a shield to protect them. This would lead to Gigabite being able to extinguish blazing Apache and win the fight. This is when Gigabite would discover justice and become GigaGaga. The duo would proceed to fight evil in the Dark World. Together, they would proceed to face off once again with the Invader of Darkness. And during the fight, one of the captain's soldiers would find himself about to be killed by the Invader, but as the captain once did for him, GigaGaga used his body as a shield to protect the soldier. About to lose the fight, they are able to escape the Invader once more, and GigaGaga meets with a certain mad scientist to help him with his life-threatening injuries. This is how he becomes GigaGaga. This new power would quickly corrupt GigaGaga, however. Wanting revenge on the man who sent him to the Dark World in the first place, he would leave the lab and send himself back to his own dimension. Testing his newfound power on a nearby Cobra, GigaGaga once again faces Freed. But GigaGaga is not the only one who has gotten stronger. Freed has also gotten stronger with new technology to boot. Draining his attacks and hitting GigaGaga with a counterblow, once again, Freed defeats the lizard. Desiring even more power, he sacrifices what's left of himself to become GigaGaga. Seeking revenge on everyone he's faced, including beheading Apache and defeating the Invader of Darkness, he, for the final time, goes after Freed. Marauding Captain, however, steps in, reminding GigaGaga of who he once was and the companionship they shared over justice. The captain was not able to only save Freed, but GigaGaga, who would become GigaGaga the Risen. And that's the lore of how Petite Dragon was a tiny dragon that fought alongside other monsters to keep itself safe. Sometimes they could scare them off, but their power together would still not be enough. But luckily, the dragon would be taken in by Win the Wind Charmer, and the two would fight alongside each other. The Petite Dragon would eventually grow up into Ranryu, fighting alongside Win until he became unpossessed and goes off on his own. Coming across a fire-breathing plant, the once Petite Dragon devours it, hoping to get fire-breathing powers of his own. This backfires and turns him into Dark Fire Dragon. He would join forces with 4 other elemental dragons and become the 5-headed dragon. This beast would eventually be slain by the Dragon Master Knight, who would seal Dark Fire Dragon into the Salamandra sword. This sword would come to be wielded by a great warrior who would be known as the Flame Swordsman. And that's the lore of how Moki is an angel whose thoughts are a mystery to everyone. Residing in the angelic realm, it's usually treated as an outcast and being made a fool of, but they're so spaced out they never notice. But even Moki can lose their temper once in a while, especially if you take their snacks or interrupt their naps. Then they're able to put up quite a fight. Out of nowhere, a giant outbreak of Moki would shake up the heavens. Suddenly appearing in unprecedented numbers, some Moki would fuse and form the Moki King. Others would play devious traps on others, causing them to fall in trap holes, some even to other dimensions. Convinced they were just almighty creations, since no one knew the cause of the outbreak. Moki are actually mass-produced in a factory, making seemingly endless little angels to flood the heavens with. And that's the lore of how Coach Goblin was once known as the strongest man alive, on the road to receiving a championship belt, but unfortunately retiring before he could. He now spends his days training other monsters such as Giant Orc in his rundown gym to achieve his dream. And he puts his students through the ringer. The old gym, before Goblin took over, was home to an undefeated champion known as Master of Oz, who, before his training, was just Big Koala. Goblin hopes to raise a champion like him one day. Another one of his students was the lightning quick Des Kangaroo. Stepping in the ring with him, the coach thinks he may have a champ on his hands. And that's the lore of how Coach Goblin was one day taking his student Giant Orc on a tour of the underworld to get in some training. Giant Orc would miss the bus at one of the stops, however, being a little preoccupied with getting himself some ice cream, and leaving the coach all by himself. During the tour, the coach would be attacked by a crazy beast, but being a once masterclass fighter, the coach is able to tame the beast and return safely back to his home dimension. And that's the lore of how Dark Scorpions were a famous team of treasure-stealing thieves, declaring there's no treasure we can't steal. The group would use lots of poses, and every meeting the group would decide which poses to do based on a majority vote. Gathered and led by Don Zalug, the group trusts and rely on him, his trademark eye patch being decorated with treasure from one of his first tomb robberies. Before founding the Dark Scorpions, the Don would treasure hunt all by himself. The other members are Cliff the Trap Remover, the most feared after Dawn. He's the brains of the group and gets angry when his glasses are dirty. Gorg the Strong, who has superhuman strength but gets very nervous around Mine. He doesn't speak his mind very often. Mine the Thorn, who's indispensable to the team, but Dawn is indebted to her. And Chick the Yellow, who's just an apprentice but he trains his hardest every day. His biggest obstacle being his cowardice. Robbing the royal family, the treasure room would be guarded by multiple traps, such as a needle wall, a trap dust chute, and just a gust of wind. The Scorpions use their skills to overcome these obstacles with ease and take the treasure. And that's the lore of how Alchemic Magician and Slacker Magician were once rivals and would compete against each other to make potions. They are now best friends and run a potion shop, although Slacker Magician's introversion causes her to stay home and spend her days researching. It worries Alchemic Magician since she's not being her old energetic self. Slacker Magician wouldn't accept Alchemic's offers to come out, so she has to drag her out by force. While trying to drag her out, in comes their rival Akashic Magician. Akashic and Alchemic proceed to get into an argument. Having had enough, Slacker Magician throws them out of her home and proceeds to get back to work on her instant energy potions. They are very popular with warriors and laborers, even with its major side effect. And that's the lore of how Gravekeepers are a clan who pledged eternal loyalty to the royal family. Their spirits laid to rest in the Necro Valley. The Gravekeepers protect their tombs from generation to generation. Gravekeeper's chief was requested by the pharaoh himself and is head of the clan. Never knowing when a grave robber will appear, Gravekeepers are always on the watch for suspicious activity, with a spy lurking in the shadows and a guard at the entrance of the tombs. They never show mercy to grave robbers. The royal family is sacred and holy to them, cursing grave robbers into fever-driven nightmares, eventually dying after from the curse, and an assailant who assassinates any who dare to rob the tombs. She would offer herself for tribute and become a night assailant. The souls of the royal family wander their tombs, with disaster falling upon any who dare to rob them. And that's the lore of how White Magician Pikaru and Ebon Magician Kuran were daughters to the king of the land of magic, one of the many countless dual worlds. The ancient tradition is that children of the king must train alone. Pikaru would train day in and out on her magic, trying to be the next princess. The most basic form of magic from the royal family is Second Sight, which allows you to read thoughts. Another is the Circle of Enchantment, which allows her to heal the people around her. When it was time for her test, she was reunited with her sister. The two would have to team up and defeat the trial together, and with a double team attack, they pass. After passing the trial, Pikaru would become Princess Pikaru, and Kuran would become Princess Kuran, becoming idols in the land of magic. And that's the lore of how Charmers are spellcasters who fight by borrowing the power of strong monsters. The main four are Asa the Earth Charmer, who's accompanied by Archfiend Marmot of the Nefarious, Hitsa the Fire Charmer and Foxfire, Area the Water Charmer, who has Gigabyte, and Wind the Wind Charmer, who's followed by Petite Dragon. When it's time to battle, each Charmer's partner transforms and possesses the Charmer, and while they're possessed, they're able to use their respective spiritual art to release the hidden powers inside their monsters. When they come together, they can perform a grand spiritual art. Asa uses spiritual earth art Kurogane to become familiar possessed Asa, which also turns her little archfiend into an eater of nefariousness. Area uses spiritual water art Aoi to become familiar possessed Area, and her little Gigabyte turns into Gigabyte. Hita uses spiritual fire art Kurenai, and her little Firefox becomes Inari Fire. Wind uses spiritual wind art Miyabi to become familiar possessed Wind, and her Petite Dragon becomes Ranryu. And they awaken their possessed spirits, becoming awakened possessed Nefarious or Archfiend, Greater Inari Fire, Gigigobite, and Rasen Ryu to win their battles. In their adulthood, the Charmers would become cataclysmic with their power. Asa becomes Avalanching Asa and is the guardian of the earth. Area becomes Raging Area, calling forth water attribute monsters. Hita becomes Blazing Hita, freely controlling blazing flames. And Wind becomes Storming Wind, mastering her control of the wind and can whip up tornadoes with ease. At some point, the Charmers would unpossess their respective monsters and partner up with new little creatures and continue to master their crafts and elements. Asa would become Asa the Earth Charmer Immovable, Hita becoming Hita the Fire Charmer Ablaze, Area becomes Area the Water Charmer Gentle, and Wind would become Wind the Wind Charmer Verdant. And that's the lore of how Buster Blader was a dragon-slaying warrior who would don his armor and weapons with parts from the dragons he's slain, with his sword being an emblem of the Dragon Destroyer, and over time he would become known as the Destruction Swordmaster. One day Buster Blader would come across a ferocious dragon that he assumed was about to kill a tiny whelp of a dragon. Buster Blader would slay the dragon and save the whelp. Despite only knowing to slay dragons, he decides to take the whelp along with him as his companion, teaching the whelp to fight alongside him. However, as the two would fight alongside each other, whelp would become stronger and seemingly more dangerous, not only to enemies but to Buster Blader, eventually becoming Buster Dragon and resembling the same dragon that Buster Blader slayed that fateful day. After giving into his power, Whelp wanted revenge on Buster Blader for slaying his mother. The two would fight, with Buster Blader being victorious. Feeling resentment for slaying the companion he loved, Buster Blader and Whelp would become one, turning him into the Dragon Destroyer swordsman, making him more powerful than he'd ever been. And even with Whelp gone, he would still stick by Buster Blader's side and protect him, even in spirit. And that's the lore of how Trap Tricks are insect girls that live in the ancient forest and specialize in luring unknowing monsters into the forest and using trap holes to capture them. Trap Tricks Atrax is a spider-like creature and uses her threads to bind you up and prevent you from running. Trap Tricks Murmaleo is an antlion-like creature that digs trap holes around the forest to trap her prey. Trap Tricks Nepenthes is a pitcher plant-like creature that lures her prey in with a sweet scent. Trap Tricks Dionea is a monster that you should be careful around, as many other Trap Tricks
monsters commonly live near it, with Traptrix Rafflesia being the leader of all of them. Once monsters enter the forest, they usually don't come back out, as they get lost in the forest and eventually lured into a trap hole. And unfortunately, once that happens, the likelihood of escape is slim to none. Even if you are able to escape, there's still plenty more traps that await you in the forest. Traptrix sometimes even team up with other monsters to lure prey into the trap holes. Once they are caught, they are then devoured by the Traptrix. It is recommended you bring along some powerful bug spray to repel them when exploring the ancient forest. And that's the lore of how the magical stone of wisdom Elixir was famed to bring unending power to whomever would obtain it. And one man through sheer ego and greed swallowed up the stone and it cursed all of its might. In the past, multiple sages possessed by greed offered thousands of souls to the stone Elixir until it was finally awakened and shined a bright crimson, transforming the land its light would touch into a golden city and reducing all life inside to just a shambling of the undead. The stone would eventually fall into the hands of an inhumanly strong-willed man who would become Eldritch the Golden Lord and would become ruler of the Golden Land. But that wasn't enough for him. Eldritch would perform a ritual that would raise the curtain on his march to the world itself and would turn him into Eldritch the Mad Golden Lord, and he would achieve the unending power brought by the stone. The curse of the stone had no mercy for who or what it ensnared. From gold-hungry travelers, armies looking to conquer new land, and even the native beasts of the city were all transformed into deathless gold. Eldritch had finally achieved his golden land. And that's the lore of how Doom King Ballerjock and Red-Eye Zombie Dragon would struggle in their fight for supremacy in the land of the undead. The Doom King, who craved the great power of the Red Eyes, managed to steal the right eye of Red-Eye Zombie Dragon and would expand his power and influence across the zombie world, and from sea creatures to plant life would turn the once living into immortal undead. Feeling weak and losing power, the zombie dragon would absorb the souls of the tower in the zombie world and would evolve into Red-Eye Zombie Necro Dragon and seek revenge on Ballerjock. They would clash once more and Red Eyes would come out victorious and would rule the land of the undead as Red-Eye Zombie Dragon Lord. And that's the lore of how Skull Servant had an interesting life, or rather afterlife. His resting place started out in the graveyard until one night a spirit caller would come in and awaken him and many other skull servants from the undead. He would be controlled by the zombie master along with three-legged Plague Sprader and Reborn Zombie. Plague Sprader and Unizombie would be used for more entertainment purposes, but Skull Servant would be used as soldiers in the war between Hades and Dark King of the Abyss. Some would be blasted to pieces, but luckily for our Skull Servant, he would gracefully be given a second chance in life with his new power and would become King of the Skull Servants, and even find himself a little puppy. In the graveyard, even more skulls would be revived, such as Lady in White, White Prince, White Princess, and White Mare, and together they would form the White Family, with King of the Skull Servants also being a pretty good cook. Their family would try to go on vacation amongst the living, but sadly they would be stopped and their pets would be contained in quarantine. Happy Halloween, everyone. And that's the lore of how Ghostricks are spooky little pranksters that lurk in an abandoned house outside of town, in a museum, and sometimes the town itself. Personally, I love these guys. Ghostrick Alucard is a guardian figure to the Ghostricks and prefers sleeping rather than actually pulling pranks, and will watch over the graveyard as Spectre and Lantern give the intruders a scare. The mansion of Alucard itself is where they spend most nights. The ones who inhabit the mansion are Ghostrick Spectre, who pops out from the dark to give those who are lost a good scare. Ghostrick Lantern, who is Spectre's partner in crime. His lantern can give away his position sometimes. Ghostrick Yuki-Onna, who is very quiet and has a soothing presence to the mansion's inhabitants. Ghostrick Witch, who uses her magic to drain the person's ability to move, and she isn't afraid of anything. Ghostrick Jiangshi, who is always on the watch and alerting the other Ghostricks of intruders. Ghostrick Yeti, who always carries around a doll that Yuki-Onna gave him. And Ghostrick Stein, who is the gentle giant of the group. And whether it's giving the mansion a clean or renovating it, playing games like golf, or playing pranks on each other and giving one another a scare to cheer each other up, the Ghostricks just like to have fun. When night falls on the museum, the Ghostricks masquerading as exhibits begin to move up and about, although sometimes they get a little reckless with the actual exhibits. The museum inhabitants are Ghostrick Dullahan, who is the leader of the museum members and haunts an antique set of armor. Ghostrick Jack Frost, who loves the museum's 24/7 air conditioning. Ghostrick Mary, who haunts the old dresser in the museum. Ghostrick Neko Musume, who helps clean up messes and watches over the museum. Ghostrick Mummy, who, before coming to the museum, was all alone and wished for nothing more than friends, and was filled with excitement to join the Ghostricks. And Ghostrick Skeleton, who slips around the exhibits and blends in well, considering he's not an actual exhibit of the museum. At the town's haunted house, Skeleton decided to pull a prank on one of the others, but unfortunately got a little too caught up in the revolving door, leaving Neko to help him clean up the mess. The last place some of the Ghostricks hang out is actually amongst the townspeople unnoticed. These are Ghostrick Doll, who's a doll that was possessed by a spirit and lives in a young girl's house. She doesn't play many pranks herself. Ghostrick Warwolf, who transforms at night and is a normal human during the day, and they are protected by Ghostrick So Cute Boss, who fools people into thinking they are dreaming when she is spotted. And all the Ghostricks meet up in the town during the night to throw different parades and festivals to celebrate the season and have a great time. The people who spot them just think of it as a normal festival and think nothing of it. And that's the lore of Ghostricks. Dark King of the Abyss and Dark Ruler Hades would face off in a war to rule the darkness. Dark King of the Abyss was a powerful ruler of the darkness and would control it with an iron fist, until Dark Ruler Hades would dethrone him and take control of the evil. Because Becoming a tyrant who would take control of the darkness and evil, he would summon minions and control them to fight for him and defend him. But this didn't mean he was weak. He was actually extremely powerful, being able to destroy his enemies in many ways, such as weakening them with a roar, turning them to dust with just a snap of his fingers, or even demolishing their souls. But one day, Dark King of the Abyss would come back with a vengeance and attack the Dark Ruler, making him lose his powers and draining him of all life. This would be fatal to Hades. However, he would be revived thanks to the Plague Spreader virus, turning him into revived King Hades and using his powers to revive more minions to fight for him in the war for darkness, and would ambush the Dark King and defeat him. But the war was far from over, as Dark King of the Abyss would rise from the grave just as Hades has done, continuing the war to rule over the darkness, casting a curse on Hades to steal his soul just as he's done to many others, and would use it to make himself even more powerful. He would use the soul of the Dark Ruler to blast him and finish him off once and for all, and become the new King of the Darkness, until Archfiend Emperor, the first Lord of Horror, would take the Dark King of the Abyss and use him to fuel his own resurrection. And that's the lore of how Kozaki was a famous scientist known all across the Dark World who would overwork himself to the point of insanity. He would spend hours upon hours, day in and out, in his lab, researching and studying with plenty of tools at his disposal and books upon books of calculations for whatever he would work on next. Countless experiments could be contributed to Kozaki, finding a lost puppy and turning him into a mecha dog bodyguard, coming across a burnt up Apache and turning him into a woodborg Apache, making a giant robot version of himself and simply calling it Giant Kozaki, or even offering cybernetic enhancements to those who came to him. Kozaki was a maniacal mastermind. Kozaki would eventually team up with another mastermind on his level in Magical Scientist and team up to work on even more massive projects. The two would even be responsible for creating the Kawaki Meru monsters and even develop a rival in Dr. Frankenderp. Such a stupid name. Magical Scientists could see that the probability in success in these experiments were slim to none, but Kozaki would refuse to listen to him. Magical Scientist was correct and the lab would proceed to malfunction. Kozaki would run over and hit his lab's self-destruct button. He would rather blow up his lab than let someone else finish his work. His partners would escape the lab, not wanting to get caught up in the explosion, with even one of Kozaki's experiments evacuating the lab to return to his home. And that's the lore of how Live Twins are a popular streaming duo that have hidden identities when they go offline. The duo consists of live twin Kiss-a-Kill, who likes shoes, dancing, and animals. She wears wacky costumes and is considered a weirdo by others. And live twin Leela, who likes sharks, money, and being popular. She wears costumes that are somehow gross and cute at the same time. When you enter the homepage of their website, you are greeted by a fun animation of the two, but people complain since it gets in the way. When you get to their homepage, you are introduced to their fun personalities, but some people call them tryhards for it. Their goal is to be #1 in the world of streaming. They do this by wearing different fun outfits Leela makes for them, and with Kiss-a-Kill's modeling skills, it helps them go viral, and are one step closer to being the top ranked streamers. They also try to go viral by showing off their musical skills. When nighttime comes, the fun-loving twins turn into talented phantom thieves for hire. Evil twin Kiss-a-Kill and evil twin Leela, known as the Evil Twins, with their favorite jobs involving expensive jewelry and gems. People can make requests for the agents through their streaming channel, which they use as a facade. One of their jobs was to steal the Big Jewel, which was being bought and sold illegally, and guarded by strict security. However, for the twins, this job is no problem. It's no wonder they're such high-rank agents. However, the agents do have their fair share of competition in Evil Twins Trouble Sunny. The twins aren't the only ones trying to be #1. Sunny will occasionally beat the two to their heist and leave them in the dust, bragging about it and mocking the two on her own website. I wonder who will come out on top in the world of free agents. And that's the lore of how Gearfried the Swordmaster was a warrior so great he could devastate the entire battlefield by merely holding his weapon. Scared of his own might, he would seal himself away in restricting iron armor to limit his power, only ever releasing himself if it was absolutely necessary. Gearfried would also hold the power of the Red Eyes to become Knight of the Red Eyes. Gearfried would come across a sacred feather of the Phoenix of Nephthys. This feather would unlock incredible powers for the Knight. Engulfing Gearfried in flames, he would transform and unlock flame-wielding powers. His power would only grow and he would ascend further beyond into Phoenix Gearfried. The menacing and powerful Knight would continue to elevate into immortal Phoenix Gearfried. Gearfried's power would no longer be restrained and would continue his journey as the strongest warrior as Light Ray Gearfried. Special thanks to my cuties over on Patreon, TWR Gaming, and Paul. Thank you guys so much for supporting. And that's the lore of how Warrior Digrapher was a dragon manipulating warrior who would end up either a powerful sword master or would let himself be overcome by darkness. Ever since Digrapher was a child, the sword was a part of him. He had the utmost confidence in his swordsmanship. Slaying pesky enemies with ease, he was a master of his craft. His arch enemy would be another warrior he met on the battlefield. He refused to go easy on her just because she was a lady. However, an unexpected force would send their weapons flying
flying out of their hands. This unexpected force would drag Lady of the Wasteland to a different dimension, where she would train and become the mighty DD warrior lady. She would return to her dimension and face off against Digrapher. Digrapher would use some interesting tactics in order to distract his enemy, and although he had her on the brink, she would open up a portal to another dimension and send him right through it. In this dimension, Digrapher's skills as a warrior would be tested. He would form a team of other warriors and spellcasters, and together they would fight in order to help Digrapher back to his own dimension. Being caught off guard by an enemy group of spellcasters, they would summon monsters to attack, but Digrapher's allies would be there to save him. Ready for his rematch against DD Warrior Lady, the spellcasters would attempt to send Digrapher back to his home. Digrapher would be transported into a forest. Unaware if he's home or not, who'd begin to wander and would come across a split path. This is where Digrapher's fate would branch off into multiple timelines. Now this is where the story gets a little complicated, so if you have a different interpretation of how the story unfolds, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you guys think. The paths would branch off into two different ways, a light hero path essentially, and a dark evil path. Going down the light path, Digrapher would meet Spirit Ryu, and with Ryu's powers, the two would fuse and become Ryu Senshi. In another timeline, Grepher would come across a chamber filled with weapons beyond his imagination. These weapons would include some twin swords, a butterfly dagger, a gravity axe, a rod of silence, a shooting star bow, and a wicked breaking flamberge. Each weapon would contain its own guardian protecting the weapons. In one of these timelines, Grepher would try and take the twin swords, being a masterclass swordsman himself. The guardian Trice would see the potential in Grepher and allow him to wield the blades. Grepher and his new weapons would try once again to make it back home, coming across a very familiar and evil looking face in the process, but luckily for him, he makes it back home safe and sound. In another timeline, Grepher would try and wield the axe, but the guardian known as Guardian Grawl oh, that's hard. Didn't think Grepher was worthy enough since he was a sword wielder, so he would punish him. Grepher would try to crawl his way back onto the path, seeing silhouettes of what would await for him. Another path would see Digrapher coming face to face with an evil version of himself, known as Dark Grepher. The two would battle until a monster from the woods would appear and attack both of them. Having no choice but to work together, they would take on the monster, and on the brink of defeat, Dark Grepher would sacrifice himself to slay the beast, and ultimately save Digrapher, but his sword would be beyond repair. This would lead Grepher back to the Chamber of Weapons, where he would pick up the wicked breaking flamberge. The guardian of this weapon, Guardian Bao, was much less willing to let Grepher take his weapon, so he would attack. Grepher's sword would give out and break during the fight, so left with no choice, he took the sword being guarded by Bao and proceeded to use the last of his might to defeat him with it. This would have devastating consequences for Grepher. The sword Grepher took was actually a part of the fiend's body. The darkness would slowly consume Grepher. Unable to fight it off and resist, the darkness from the sword would continue to consume Grepher, turning him almost unrecognizable from his former self. And he would now be known as Dark Lucius. Dark Lucius would travel through dimensions to try to find his old foe, the reason he became like this in the first place, and also coming across a very familiar, much more noble face in the process. But he was no match for her, and she would send him right back through the portal he came through. Filled with rage at being unable to defeat his enemy, the darkness in the sword would consume him more and more, turning him into the ultimate evil life form. Very special thank you to my patrons like TWR Gaming and Paul for supporting me over on Patreon. Go check it out if you feel like it. If not, thank you so much anyways for watching and making it this far in the video. And that's the lore of how
The seas are pesky little insects that infest the home of many. Based off the smoky brown cockroach, a common pest in Japan, they lurk in the shadows of people's homes and use their hidden ability to fly to give them the advantage against their titan-sized foes. If you don't get rid of the infestation quick, they will multiply until they're too much to handle. Thinking they're a normal household pest, most people will confront the sea when they catch them. This doesn't end well most of the time, as when they are caught they use their ability to fly to catch their enemies off guard. This is when they use their advantage to strike back against the foe. When striking back isn't enough, the seas also have a super armored robot armed black iron sea. Which is piloted by one of the squatters. This insect is a much more difficult one to deal with, so if you find one in your home, you better hope your best bug spray can handle it. Special shout out to my Patreons, TWR Gaming, Paul, and Kaiserin for supporting me over on Patreon. Go check it out if you feel like it. If not, thank you so much for watching anyways. And that's the lore of how the people of the kingdom would be oppressed by the corrupt king and emperor until they could take it no longer. The king would rule over his kingdom, which was surrounded by an imperial iron wall. Let's call this Wara Maria. And he would rule it with an iron fist, creating unfair laws for the people and greatly punishing those who would dare to disobey, issuing royal decrees, imperial orders, imperial customs, prohibitions, heavily taxing the poor civilians of the kingdom, and would punish those who could not fulfill them. The king had no mercy. The poor people of the kingdom would have to pay these heavy tolls as said by the king, with the toll only getting higher and higher. If they could not fulfill these, then they would have to make some very painful choices as to what they would use to pay pay these taxes, or even have their belongings confiscated from them. The king would hire some dimensional warriors for secret jobs unknown to the people and would burn the paperwork to hide his deeds from the masses. The king would also host secret meetings, and during those meetings the king would use his forceful century to make sure the meetings go in his favor by forcing the opposing party to sign off on whatever he wanted. The civilians of the kingdom were oppressed, but it wouldn't end there. Those who would dare to disobey the king would face the royal command. The royal command would punish these acts of rebellion by throwing them into royal prison. By the looks of it, the people of the kingdom aren't the only ones breaking the rules around here. These prisoners would join together and form the exiled force. The king was not the only form of corrupt power in the kingdom, however. The kingdom also had a tyrannical emperor, and when he wasn't busy off on a holiday, he would be at the kingdom, letting his temper get the better of him and taking it out on his captain, going on tirades on his field commander, and sometimes even going on full-blown tantrums with whichever unlucky soul or attack force would be nearby on the receiving end. When no one was around for him to take his anger out on, the tyrant would just lash out on whatever was around him, with the guards' futile attempt to calm him down. When he wasn't throwing tantrums, the tyrant would either be gorging himself with food or falling asleep on the job. The people of the kingdom had had enough living like this, so they all decided to join together and form a united resistance to overthrow the corrupt powers of the kingdom. Together, this united resistance would form a huge revolution against the powers that be. Side note, in Rush Duel, they have insect versions of these cards where they're all ants, and they have fun names like Oppressed Ants, Ants Running About, United Ants, and Giant Revolution. And I found that out while making this video, and I just thought it was actually really funny, and I just wanted to share it. Rush Duel is pretty cool. You guys should check it out. Okay, back to the lore. The people would form a huge revolution to overthrow the power of the kingdom and get payback on the kingdom. The emperor would attempt to put a stop to this by using his guards to seize the crowd and shut them down. However, the people were prepared for this. The exiled forces were waiting on the outskirts of the kingdom in the form of a throwstone unit. This throwstone unit would use catapults to launch rocks into the castle and bombard it. The kingdom, now in shambles, would surrender to the people. The revolution would be a success. The people, now filled with joy, they had finally achieved liberty at last. Free from the tyranny of the kingdom, the king would no longer need the emperor, seeing what the people would be capable of, and the emperor would wander the streets among the people who despise him the most. Thank you guys so much for watching and making it this far in the video, and a special thank you to my patrons, TWR Gaming, Paul, Kaiserin, Tyrannicule, and Skull Servant for supporting me over on Patreon. It really means the world to you guys. Thank you so much. Go check it out if you feel like it. If not, thanks so much for watching anyways. I really appreciate it. And that's the lore of how Shiranui were sword wielders who would create their signature Shiranui style to counter and wage war on the demonic, fearsome monsters known as the Mayakashi. The signature Shiranui style was created by combining various forms of martial arts from different schools. The founder of the Shiranui was sealed inside his sword after being struck down in a battle against the Mayakashi, and he's now known as the Spectral Sword. The Spectral Sword would proceed to be passed down along the Shiranuis from generation to generation, to the most gifted of the Shiranui style over the course of the 100-year war. The general public would be aware of the existence of the Mayakashi, while some of the Shiranui passed down their history of their battles against the demons, all of them with the intent to commit themselves to the fight against these devils. Shiranui Samurai Saga is the soul of the Shiranui style founder who was struck down by the Mayakashi. Despite losing his life to the demons, his obsession with stopping them only grew stronger, and through his spirit would teach the newer generations the secrets and history of the Shiranui style. The Shiranui have a swordsmith of the Shiranui style, one of his relatives losing their life in a battle against the Mayakashi. He now forges day and night, crafting blades to slay the mighty foes, and a spirit master who is responsible for presenting these swords at Shito shrines, so they can be granted divine protection against Kami and Buddha. The blades crafted by the smith are able to oppose the Mayakashi after they've undergone this ritual. The Mayakashi themselves wield fearsome and devastating yokai magic. However, it can only be demonstrated during nightfall, as they seek to erase the daylight and plunge the world into eternal night, so their power could be endless, such as Hajun the Winged Mayakashi, who becomes Tengu the Winged Mayakashi when night falls, and Yuki Musume the Ice Mayakashi, who, when the sun goes down, transforms into Yuki Onna the Ice Mayakashi. The leader of the Mayakashi possesses the greatest yokai magic, and during the day disguises herself as Daki the Graceful Mayakashi, a gorgeous woman who uses her beauty to sway the hearts of humans to try to find out more about the Shiranui style, and during nighttime becomes the powerful Yoko the Graceful Mayakashi. The current heir to the Shiranui, Samurai, would be in a battle against the Mayakashi, and would use a secret ritual known as the Shiranui style synthesis. This allows Samurai to to fuse his body with the spirit of Samurai Saga, the soul of the spectral sword, and become Shogun Saga. Shogun Saga hunts down the Mayakashi, but it's not enough to seal them away for good. So with the help of Spirit Master, they created the Samsara formation, which allows the once sealed Samurai Saga a temporary physical form. Revived a Shiranui Sun Saga to seal the Mayakashi away for good, or so they thought. The ever-persistent Mayakashi would slowly show signs of returning as time passed after being sealed away. Over time, as the samurai grew older, he realized he would have to put in place a new heir to the Shiranui, passing the sword down to Shiranui's squire. Samurai would soon pass away after this, with his spirit and knowledge of the Shiranui style fusing with the spectral sword. The power from Samurai would strengthen the sword and would become the Shiranui Spectral Sword Shade. Squire, who spent her days training, would come across a certain woman. The two would bond and form a strong friendship. This woman was Yoko in disguise, slowly regaining her powers while deceiving the Shiranui heir. Yoko's affection to Squire would infuse the sword with yokai magic, making it even more powerful. Squire uses this newfound power to become Shiranui's Skill Saga Supremacy. However, this magical boost of power made Squire realize that the companion she made was just an enemy in disguise, and thus they would come to battle. The long-fought battle between Yoko and Supremacy would go on until a hidden Yuki Onna would sneak up on the Skill Saga Supremacy. Slowly approaching her, Yuki Onna would steal the power of the blade from Skill Saga Supremacy, wielding both the powers of the Shiranui style as well as the most powerful yokai magic. Yuki Onna would become Yuki Onna the Absolute Zero Mayakashi, and would proceed to begin her goal of an eternal night. This channel has just reached 20,000 subscribers, and my gratitude honestly cannot be processed into words. All I can really do is just say thank you guys so much. If you've ever liked, commented, shared, or even just watched and enjoyed a video, thank you so much. And another special thank you to my Patreon supporters, TWR Gaming, Paul, Kaiserin, Tyrannicule, Skull Servant, and Zuri. Thank you guys so much, man. Go check it out if you feel like it. If not, thanks anyways for watching and making it this far in the vid. It is very greatly appreciated. And that's the lore of how even in the Yu-Gi-Oh world they celebrate the holidays. And during this special occasion, there was a little Goblin Boy who had it just a little worse than the others. During the gift exchange, when all the other kids were opening up their toys, the boy would open up his Scrap Kong shirt. He really wanted a Gyugi toy, but his dad seems to think he looks pretty stylish in it, even though the others find it funny. During the Fukubiki, a fun lottery game, all the other kids would win cool new items and toys, while the boy would just win some toilet paper. During the Yaminabe party, a traditional hot pot where everyone puts ingredients in without the others knowing, everyone else got their favorites, while the boy just pulled some broccoli. Unfortunately, his luck wouldn't pick up. His Onikuji, a fortune slip predicting your luck for the next year, ranging from great fortune to curses, would just say false. He could at least have some fun with his friends comparing curses if he got one. Even during Mame Maki, the role in which a child puts on an Oni mask and everyone throws beans at him, everyone was ignoring the boy to have their own fun. He honestly wouldn't mind the attention of them throwing the beans at him. And he would even try his luck at goldfish scooping, failing to catch one every single time and using up all of his allowance. Hopefully his luck picks up in the next year. Special thank you to my Patreon supporters. Happy holidays, everyone. And that's the lore of how